Biden, after consoling Hawaiians with his liar, liar, house on fire lie, has now tried to claim that on September the 12th, he was at ground zero, sticking up for those brave Americans that suffered those assaults and that onslaught. When in fact, what he was doing on September the 12th was advocating for a war in Iraq that was a complete, made-up, fiasco lie. Liar, liar, house on fire. Not just the house, maybe the whole world. Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on our voyage to truth and freedom together. Do subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell because it helps us stay connected, and by God, we need connection. We talked, didn't we, about Joe Biden going off to Hawaii and saying, oh, you know, I know what it's like to have your whole country devastated by fires, because there was a time where one room of my house briefly caught fire and gave me the opportunity to potentially get some nice new stuff. Wink, wink. I almost lost my Chevy 67 and my cat. He scoffed to the devastated people of Maui.
Almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat.
Well, now Joe Biden has claimed that on September the 12th, he was one of the almost the first responder, almost rushing up the stairwells of the North Tower, when in fact, after the horrific attacks of September the 11th, what Joe Biden was actually doing was advocating for attacks on Iraq, which retrospectively were a waste of time and made things a hell of a lot worse. How like him.
I join you on this solemn day
to tell some little old lies,
to renew our sacred vow. Never forget. Never forget.
It's a bit rich coming from you, mate. I don't think you're going to get to the end of this sentence, are you? Never forget. Never fulfill. Never laptop to the... Wait, what was I saying?
We never forget.
Joe Biden's catchphrase should not be never forget. Joe Biden's catchphrase would be, I do sometimes forget.
Each of us, each of those precious lives stolen too soon when evil attacked.
That rhetoric is much too similar to the George W. Bush rhetoric that at that time was condemned by the neoliberal establishment for being too simplistic and reductive. Evil, all that kind of stuff, you know? Like, aren't we ready for a different type of perspective? What new is this person offering when it comes to international diplomacy, geopolitics, new world solutions, organizing democracy differently? It was evil. Like, of course, the bombing of the Twin Towers was evil, but there's no review of what took place after those events, whether the subsequent war was illegal, immoral, and wrong, and how that pertains to current conflicts. They can't give you that because essentially the same administration or the same sets of interest are still governing America right now. Joe Biden, who's about to claim that he spent September the 12th clearing up rubble, was actually advocating for the invasion of Iraq on September the 12th. So ultimately what you're able to witness is, in spite of the fluctuations and the mad static that takes place in the mainstream, the kind of political figures that are offered up to you as leaders will continue with the war machine. Except, let us know in the comments if anyone's outside of that, you crazy kids.
Ground Zero in New York. And I remember standing there the next day and looking at the building. I felt like I was looking through the gates of hell. It looked so devastating.
That's such a mad thing to say if it's not true. I was like looking through the gates of hell at the devastation. Were you even there? No, I was actually advocating for creating more war and mayhem in Iraq.
Because from where you could stand.
What, you could see all that from Washington, where you were advocating for invading Iraq? Yeah, I got really good eyes. I did then. And plus, I never forget. I never, ever forgo, Bojo.
Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The Pentagon in Virginia. I spent many 9/11s in those hallowed grounds to bear witness and remember those we lost. Every day, but especially the last few days, their memory has been with me.
In a speech in Anchorage, Alaska on Monday to commemorate the 22nd anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, President Joe Biden told service members, first responders and their families that he visited Ground Zero the day after September 11 attacks that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. Ground Zero in New York, he remarked, I remember standing there the next day and looking at the building. I felt like I was looking through the gates of hell. It looked so devastating from where you could stand. I suppose what their defense would be is like, oh, he was there a few days later or a week later or whatever it is. But in a sense, what you have is just a series of events where Joe Biden has offered up anecdotes about how he was approximate to suffering and disaster, where in one case, there was a small fire, and in the next case, it's a big liar because he was actually exacerbating that situation by advocating for further war. Despite what he said, Joe Biden, who was then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, did not visit Ground Zero on September the 12th, 2001. He was in Washington that day, participating in a Senate session to consider a joint resolution condemning the attacks, which passed unanimously. Bit of a waste of time. Should we condemn these attacks? Yes, they were bad. They were bad. Another great day's work in the Senate. Okay, so where was Joe Biden on September the 12th?
Mr. President, this is a time to mourn, but not to despair. A time for resolve, but not remorse. A time for sober investigation and no recrimination.
Instead, Biden appeared on WNET's Charlie Rose via satellite from Washington for a segment discussing the international and congressional response to the attacks, a fact identified yesterday by National Review's Noah Rothman. In reality, Biden did not visit the site until 9 days later on September the 20th as part of a delegation of fellow senators. This is not the first time that Biden has been caught embellishing details of his own life experience, and similar incidents relating to a 2004 house fire and a supposed arrest while trying to meet Nelson Mandela in South Africa have drawn criticism in recent years. Yep, I was going over there to meet Nelson Mandela. Got myself arrested. Still met Nelson, though. I remember looking at him thinking, it's like the gates of hell. No. Wait, that's the other one. He did it 3 times in a single speech last month, falsely claiming to have witnessed a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh in 2022. He actually visited the site more than 6 hours after the collapse, falsely claiming his grandfather had died just days prior to his own birth at the same hospital. His paternal grandfather died more than a year prior in another state. Died just the day before, same hospital. It's a circle of life. It was a year before in another hospital. Still a circle of life, just a bigger circle. Never ever forget. And again, repeating a long debunked false story about a supposed conversation with an Amtrak conductor who was deceased at the time the story would have had to take place. You know, I was talking to that Amtrak striker, quiet guy, quiet and decaying slowly on a mortary slab. I liked him. Never forget. In 2021 and 2022, he falsely claimed to have been arrested during a civil rights protest. He had previously said merely that an officer had taken him home from a protest. Falsely claimed he used to drive an 18-wheeler. The White House said he once had a job driving a different vehicle, a school bus. Falsely claimed to have visited the Pittsburgh synagogue where worshippers were killed in a 2018 mass shooting. He had spoken to its rabbi by phone but had not gone. Falsely claimed to have visited Iraq and Afghanistan as president. He made repeated visits as a senator and vice president, but not as president. In a sense, either dear Joe Biden's a bit of a fibber, or he sort of can't really remember anything. And I think both of those challenges, in a sense, are a problem when you consider that he could be president for another 6 years. We make this content in collaboration with our fantastic sponsors. Here's one now. Please stay to the end. I'm going to try and make it amusing for you. Never mind these hypocritical, corrupt propagandist wars. They're getting on my nerves and they're bringing me down. You know, cheer me up. Stickers! Delicious stickers! Unique, wonderful, glorious stickers made by Sticker Mule, our sponsor today. We've teamed up with them to create this limited edition sticker pack. There are 6 rather stunning designs. Oh, look at that one. I recognise this little guy. And look at that one. That's presumably the Sticker Mule himself. It's an honour to meet you, sir. They're all made with Sticker Mule's magic touch. Sticker Mule has 10,000 of these packs. That's right, 10,000 ready to deliver to your address absolutely free. Just go to stickermule.com/Russell and fill out the form. That's all you got to do. Now let's go back to this horrific, terrible, unnecessary, dreadful, bloody war that can't be won because Russia are a serious country that will not stop. Maybe we could offer them some stickers. Maybe that'll cheer them up. Putin, would you like this crow? Would that put a smile on your face? Joe Biden, do you know who this is? I don't know, Hunter. Sticker Mule. Get yourself some stickers, they're free. Just go to stickermule.com/Russell and fill out the form. Now let's get back to this dreadful, unnecessary, unwinnable war. He told a false story involving a late relative and the Purple Heart and falsely described his interactions decades ago with late Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. No wonder he's so confused all the time. He's living simultaneous lives, he's visiting places, people are being born, he's having conversations with dead bodies. It's like Forrest Gump, really.
You know, it's funny how you remember some things, but some things you can't.
So, of course, those are rather frivolous lies, but it's worth mentioning that one of the main attacks that the Democrat Party establishment has towards Donald Trump is that he's a liar, that he doesn't tell the truth all the time, and it just just seems that, of course, they will say that Trump's lies are worse or whatever. I know loads of you adore Donald Trump. But plainly, Joe Biden is a person that has his own challenges with the truth, some of which are pretty frivolous and amusing, like some of the ones we just listed. But one of his more serious lies is his attempt to distance himself from the events that led to the invasion of Iraq, which was illegal. Here's a different perspective on Joe Biden's involvement in that terrible conflict. The Iraq War vote is part of the extensive record Biden cites, and he has struggled to accurately account for it, repeatedly suggesting he opposed the war and Mr. Bush's conduct from the beginning. Claims that detailed fact checkers have deemed wrong or misleading. Biden didn't just vote for the war, he was a leading Democratic voice in its favour and played an important role in persuading the public of its necessity and more broadly laying the groundwork for Bush's invasion. So it seems like he was a key instigator, collaborator, supporter. Now that it's no longer convenient to acknowledge that role, he claims that he opposed the war. I think this becomes relevant because continually comparisons are made between the invasion of Iraq, or the two wars with Iraq, and the ongoing proxy war now. Many people saying that all that's really changed is there's a more refined and deceptive model when it comes to foreign military action, that the intentions remain the same. America is willing to go to war for corporate globalist interests, always claiming it's for humanitarian reasons or for some righteous crusade. And Joe Biden, in spite of claiming to be on one side of history, quite plainly is on the other. As President Bush attempted to sell the US public on the war, Biden became one of the administration's steadfast allies in this cause, backing claims about the supposed threat posed by Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein and insisting on the necessity of removing him from power. Count me in the 90%, Biden said in the weeks after the attack. There was total cohesion, he said, between Democrats and Republicans in the challenges ahead. There is no daylight between us. Wow, that's a pretty significant statement. One that supports a growing belief that what you have in America is a kind of war machine that requires continual international conflict in order to sustain itself. And then it needs to find new sophistry to justify ongoing wars. This is a humanitarian war. They've got weapons of mass destruction. We're not even in this war. What do you want to happen? Putin's a criminal. That machine has to be maintained at all costs. And it seems that Joe Biden, whether it's the Iraq war or this current war, is very firmly entrenched in that mentality, which is beyond partisan politics because it's very difficult to disrupt or derail that machine. That machine is motoring forward and probably will do anything it needs to prevent its agenda being opposed. There's no daylight between the Democrats and Republicans. What if you were against that war, which, in retrospect, you would have been absolutely right to oppose? Many people did oppose it. This has nothing to do with Iraq. What are we invading Iraq for? They're not involved. It's much more to do with other countries. I probably still can't even say on YouTube. Allegations that there was deep state involvement. Even like there's so much to go into here. But look at what actually happened. No daylight between them. Both parties aligned in their agenda towards war. You had no choice. There's nothing you could have done. You can protest. You can complain about it. What did they also do during that time? Increased surveillance, increased censorship through the Patriot Act for you patriots out there, which gave them a further ability to control you that has led to very little successful action or preventative measures against terror. Do you see how crises are used in order to create more authority and more ability for centralized authority to control the population, whether it's through big tech, whether it's through military action, whether it's through more surveillance, whether it's through an ability to lock you in your home? Whatever crisis comes about, and I'm not saying the crises aren't real, 9/11 really happened, plainly. Coronavirus really happened, plainly. Wars plainly really happened. But what is the response? And what is the intention of the response? Is it humanitarian or is it profit and dominion and a unipolar agenda that seems to be being pursued aggressively to this day, with Joe Biden involved then as he was now and still lying about it, sometimes admittedly quite humorously. The Iraq War has generally been seen as one of the worst US foreign policy blunders in decades. It fueled the spread of terrorism and destabilized the Middle East and parts of North Africa. ISIL is a direct outgrowth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq that grew out of our invasion, noted President Obama. We did a story about his involvement in American foreign policy. You should have a look at that as well. More than 4,500 US soldiers and nearly as many US military contractors lost their lives. Tens and thousands were wounded, with hundreds of thousands more suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Estimates of Iraqi deaths run as high as 1 million. Bear those ideas in mind when you hear, with regard to the current conflict that America is supporting, that America are getting their money's worth because Ukrainians are dying for just 3% of the American military budget. All that's happening is this war machine is able to amend and adjust in order to continue. It seems that many policies that are presented as ideological shifts, as progress, are actually just ways of masking the same monolithic power, thrusting through history, profiting the powerful, ignoring ordinary people, dividing us through rhetoric, and claiming that it's a humanitarian enterprise. At the very least, Biden should explain why he played such a major role in winning the authorization from Congress for President Bush to wage this disastrous war. So it appears that Joe Biden has always, throughout his career, been engaged in the politics of war, making war seem necessary, humane, a response to an egregious terror attack, necessary support in a humanitarian conflict against a wild, tyrannical aggressor. Joe Biden appears to be advocating for something other than the American people. And if you ask me, something other than the truth. And whether or not these sort of casual, anecdotal indiscrepancies are significant or not is for you to decide for yourself. Perhaps it isn't that significant, but what it is an indicator of is that you have a government that does not advocate for you, that does not represent you, that has an agenda that is way beyond anything that might interest or improve your life. Big Pharma bill coming through. Not really, it won't affect Big Pharma. War coming through that you're paying for. Massive disaster in Hawaii. Irrelevant packages of aid. Ultimately, when it comes to the important issues, there's no daylight at all between the Republicans and the Democrats because they are both living in darkness, lit up only by missiles, war, and constant conflagration. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments below? If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe. Remember, we are on every day, or at least 5 days a week on the other place. Check us out there. But more important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.